Hospital port has pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to HPANWO TV. Well, you'll be glad to know I'm feeling a lot better from when I made my last video. I did have the COVID-19 disease, and I appear to be getting over it now, which is nice. But I might cough a few times in the course of this video like that. I'll just talk about that, and I do. Okay, so, well, I've managed to watch episode 3 of Project Blue Book Season 2. And this particular one is called Area 51. Well, that title in itself is like a red rag to a bull for me, isn't it? So I watched it. Now the first thing that struck me is that they are using the term UFO quite openly now within the series. There's a lot of I mean, several times people have reported to me. I mean, these are things sometimes I noticed, and sometimes these are things that other people noticed and then reported to me, is that there are a few what you might call anachronisms in the series. Now one of those is that somebody noticed that in episode 2 or episode 1, I can't remember which, the term conspiracy theorist was used by a couple of the characters. Now the term, it's interesting they use the word conspiracy theorist in it, because that term didn't exist when this was set, which was 1952. The earliest reference to the term conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theory or conspiracy theories anywhere is 1964. And the reason the term conspiracy theory, conspiracy theorist, etc. emerged at that time was because of the Warren Commission. This was just after the Kennedy assassination. The government desperately wanted to stop the people who were suspicious of the official story that Sir Oswald acted alone and for his own personal reasons. They were desperate to get that story quelled. They needed it suppressed. To do that, they needed to make sure that people who believed it and talked about it were essentially marginalised. Their ideas were laughed at, and they themselves were considered foolish for thinking it. To do that, they had to come up with a phrase, a little catchphrase, some neat little term, which in a public eye meant it was a label you could slap on someone and then associate them with this foolishness and this nonsense and this untruth. And the term they came up with was conspiracy theorist, and of course they still use it today, don't they? Now, the fact that in this particular episode, episode 3, the word UFO has come about. Now, the term UFO actually, again, can be traced very precisely back to January 1953, which is when it was brought up at the Robertson panel, where the term unidentified flying object was used to designate the phenomenon we were talking about. Before then, people said things like flying saucer. That's the term that was used. Regardless, of course, flying saucer is still used today, but then I think it's only used to refer specifically to disc-shaped objects, which is one of the most common forms of UFO. Of course, not all UFOs are flying saucers, but before 1953 the term flying saucer was used to apply to all UFOs regardless of shape. And as any sort of anorak knows, the term flying saucer itself was wrongly, it was based on a misquote by a journalist. It was actually Kenneth Arnold, the moment that triggered the beginning of the UFO era, which happened on famous Flying Saucer Day, 2nd of July, I believe. Was it 2nd of July? But I should know that, shouldn't I? But anyway, when he had his sighting, he referred them to saucer skipping on a pond. That's what they looked like. But he described them as crescent-shaped. He said they were like crescents. Now, Area 51, this particular episode, begins with a frightening scene of abduction, and that you see a man dressed in a military uniform running through the desert, and he's basically looks frightened, and then you see him disappearing into a beam of bright light, and later on he reappears, and he's had missing time. He's had 12 hours missing time, no memory, things like that, except the memory of the abduction. Now Hynek and Quinn are sent off by Harding to look into it, and they're told the usual thing. Hynek goes, you want us to investigate an alien abduction, do you? And Harding goes, no, I want you to close this case as quickly and quietly as possible. It's the usual thing. Project Blue Book is an investigation, supposedly, but it's actually not. It's not there to investigate. It's there. Was it write reports, close cases? So the idea is to cover things up. This is what the real J. Allen Hynek learnt after a while during his time in the actual service of Project Blue Book, the real Project Blue Book. Now this meeting takes place in Hynek's house, and Mimi is eavesdropping. The thing about Mimi is, as we know from the previous episodes, Mimi's now becoming more active in the particular research that's going on. Now she has joined a local UFO group, and she is covertly assisting her husband, but of course she's not officially a part of Project Blue Book. So she's kind of reporting in to them, and also she's also passing on information to Alan at the same time, which anything they gather. Because as you know from the previous episodes, this Hynek and Quinn now are kind of like double agents in a way. They are still working for Project Blue Book, but they have their own disclosure agenda, which runs independent of the chain of command. And they haven't told Harding this, of course. So it's getting very interesting now, anyway. It's getting very interesting. Anyway, they're sent to Area 51. They're dropped off in the middle of the desert. And they say, what are we going to do here now? And it's the typical... It's what you'd expect. It's the typical kind of landscape you're familiar with. The deserts, the hills, the yucca plants, the scrubs, things like that. Interestingly, these outdoor scenes in the Area 51 are shot in a very, very light sepia form. It's almost like monochrome. It's almost like black and white with very, very, very light pastel colours. It's a completely different kind of camera work on the outdoor scenes, Area 51, compared to, say, the scenes inside Harding's office, or inside the Blue Book office at Wright Pat, or inside Hynek's home, etc. They're just in the middle of the desert, and then this jeep drives up with this guy dressed very casually, a sort of black guy with sunglasses and a t-shirt, and that, you know, looks like he's just come off Venice Beach or something. And he says, "Hey, I'm Dan. How you doing?" And he, "Call me Dan." It turns out like he's in the CIA, and of course he doesn't look like the CIA part. But of course that's part of the cover. That's why he looks like that, because no, they don't want anyone to suspect him. But anyway, it's the familiar thing, the thing you're familiar with Area 51. They drive up to the base, and there is like a fence. It's not like Area 51 today, or the real Area 51. There's no actual physical fence. There's just a sign saying "Do not go any further," military base, etc. Use of deadly force is authorised. Photography is prohibited, etc. And you get the camo dudes in their van parked above the hill, ready to race down and intercept anyone who crosses over the border. In this case, it's actually Dan stops the jeep and he's sort of smiling, looking casually, and he suddenly realised there's a sniper up on the hill that's got him in his sights. And he gives the clearance code and he says, "Okay, we're cleared to enter." Now, if he hadn't given that clearance code, the sniper would have opened fire. I'm sure that something like that is actually true. Now they go to Area 51. Now Area 51 is a very, very big, bustling, well-developed base. It looks pretty much like it does today. Now this is another anachronism, because in 1953 Area 51 didn't exist. What you had was Area 51. Area 51 began in 1955 as part of the development of the U-2 spy plane. They wanted somewhere private and secluded, and something they could easily defend and keep people away in a remote area. So they could develop this spy plane, which was not revealed, was not declassified until one was shot down in 1962 over the Soviet Union. And the Russians basically held a press conference, and they themselves outed the Americans as flying spy planes over their territory. The pilot, Gary Powers, was kept in jail. I think he was going to be kept in jail for his life for espionage. In the end, he was exchanged for a guy called Rudolf Abel, who was a Soviet spy working in America. He was a Scottish guy actually, but he was working for the Soviets in America, and they did this famous exchange in Berlin, where they walk across the bridge. There's a film called Bridge of Spies, which is really good. Tom Hanks. I should really recommend that if you like these sort of spy stories. As you know, I'm into spies at the moment. But anyway, that was the history of Area 51. So Area 51 began actually as a couple of hangars and huts in 1955 with a small dirt track runway. In this particular scenario, Area 51 by 1953 is already a functioning, developed base, which has obviously been there for a long time. So that's, again, that differs from reality, but that's not a problem. I mean, it's not meant to be a bloody documentary. It's a work of fiction based on reality, like my own Roswell trilogy novels. Anyway, Hynek and Dan takes Hynek and Quinn to the base hospital. There's lots of troops everywhere. Got you know, armed guards. Now, what's interesting is, and this again is very, very cleverly done, and it does tie in with reality, is that apart from the Air Force personnel on the base, that is the actual there's like a separate Air Force facility. As you know, if you know, like the Nellis Range, there's different locations within it, and some are run by the Air Force, some are run by the CIA. The CIA runs Area 51, or now it's probably more privatised. But there's signs even back then. There was like a corporatisation. A lot of it was handed over to the private sector, because as you know, the camo dudes themselves are civilian contractors, and indeed in this particular series, in this particular episode, you see a lot of men wandering around. You think they're soldiers, they're dressed like soldiers, they have weapons and uniforms, but they don't have any badges. On a soldier's uniform you'll see badges on the arms with rank insignia, you'll see regimental flashes, you'll see the officers will have like pips on their shoulders, things like that. These guys' uniforms don't have those, which indicates they're actually separate, they're outside the conventional armed forces. They are civilian contractors or CIA personnel. And I'm glad they put that in. That's very, very important, because it gets people thinking. So they actually come across these two guys. Now this guy called Sergeant Willingham is he was the abducted guy. Now he was with someone else called Corporal Miller. They were both abducted. Willingham's turned back up. Miller can't be found anywhere. And so he's very shook up, Willingham. I mean, he won't even talk until Dan gives him a shot of whiskey. So they kind of interview this guy, and they're trying to get him to cough up. And in the meantime, Mimi is at her UFO group, and she learns from Evan, the guy who runs the group. Evan is this I think he's meant to be a kind of typical person like me, a kind of typical ufologist, a bit eccentric, out of the way, slightly isolated. He's got a wife, and together they run this UFO group in Ohio, which is where they live now. He tells Mimi, he says, because Mimi thinks that the wreckage of the Roswell craft was taken to Area 51, and we're told that, in fact, to begin with, that the wreckage from Roswell was taken to Area 51. Now we know that actually is not true, and indeed Evan reveals this. No, it was taken to Wright Field, which is today called Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The reason for that is this is literally where the trail goes cold through the official media, because you know the mainstream media did cover this with the Roswell RAAF captures flying disc news story. It was on the news as well. Do you remember? Beep 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 beep. You know, the Roswell Air Force has captured a flying saucer. You remember that, of course. That news report ends with that craft the wreckage being taken to Wright Field. So we know that happened. Then you get the General Ramey empties Roswell saucer, and well, that was it. We had 8 hours of disclosure, guys, and then they managed to get that genie back in the bottle. So that was the only 8 hours in history where we actually have real disclosure. Hopefully we'll get more in the future. But so that's where the trail goes cold. So of course that's very well known. In the meantime, Willingham takes Hynek and Quinn to the abduction scene, and they find a patch where you have like sand. The desert sand has been vitrified. It's essentially been turned into glass, because glass is basically the raw ingredient of sand is basically the raw ingredient of glass. But to make glass, you have to heat sand up to a very high temperature and you've got to stir out all the impurities to make it clean, so you get a nice transparent finish. And you see like vitrified effects on some other things. For example, obsidian you have like in volcanoes and things like that, you get vitrification. This is where the sand actually melts and then re-solidifies. You get it in volcanoes, you get it in underneath missile launches and things like that, where you get very, very hot temperatures. And so you have this underneath where these guys disappeared, and Quinn and Hynek are baffled. Well, what kind of aircraft does that? This is interesting. Then you get another scene, and Harding is clearly Roman Catholic, and he goes to confession. He gets in the confession box with the old Irish priest, you know, and he tells him everything. He says, he's crying, he's really troubled, and he keeps having flashbacks to the alien autopsy from the previous episode. I'm sorry, there are going to be spoilers. I did told there are spoilers in this, of course, as you know, and I should have said that at the beginning. But of course, there are spoilers in this particular, in all my reviews of Project Blue Book. It's just, Father, what if we were not alone? And he says, of course we're not alone, son. There are the angels and God in heaven. He said, no, Father, that's not what I meant. I meant, what if in this huge universe? And he's sort of beating around the bush a bit, but the priest is looking disconcerted. It's interesting, actually, people, and this is covered by Dolan and Zabel in After Disclosure. If you want to read AD After Disclosure by Richard Dolan and Bryce Zabel. How would the church cope with disclosure? Now, I personally think it would adapt. I think Christianity would be a bit of a, it would take some getting used to. But let's face it, I mean, Christianity has survived Darwin and the theory of evolution. Now, this is something when it first came about, and I talked about this in my previous video. I did a video where I reviewed a speech by Professor John Lennox. He did in Oxford. Now, the thing about it is, the church actually had a lot of trouble coping with that, because they believed that, of course, Garden of Eden, snake, 6 days, that kind of thing. Adam and Eve with the first, that kind of thing. They believe that. Now Darwin comes along and says, no, actually, life just evolves. It changes from one form into another, and that's how it works. And you don't need. It's not like it said in the Bible. Not that I don't think Darwin was an atheist per se, but of course his work has been used by atheists as it was back then. When it first came out, it has been basically jumped on by atheists to disprove the existence of God, because as Richard Dawkins always says, well, biology is where God did his best work, didn't he? So, of course, so there are enormous theological implications for Darwin's theory of evolution. But of course, the church survived it perfectly well. It got over it, it picked itself up, and it changed, it moved on. So I think Christianity is perfectly. I mean, Zabel and Dolan actually say this in the book. They actually are quite confident about that religions will survive in their present form. New religions may emerge, but the ones we have now will probably cope. Christianity, Judaism will adapt perfectly well. Judaism will actually cope probably even better, because they're already quite. They're more open-minded than Christians in that respect. Same with Hinduism. Islam. So I'm using the monitor screen, just put into screensaver. The monitor screen is actually part of my lighting, so when it goes to screensaver I just have to wiggle the mouse to get it out of it. Islam will not even break its stride at all, because it already has the concepts of the jinn. So this priest, of course, he looked a bit perturbed when oh my son, what do you mean, kind of thing, when Harding did his confession about aliens. That's an initial reaction you'll probably get from your average priest if in the 1950s in the United States, which of course is a very, very theocratic state. It was back then, it still is now in many areas, in the God Belt, etc., the Bible Belt, whatever they call it, but even back then even more so. So you are going to get like whatever do you mean, you must have been seeing devils, my son. Say 10 Hail Marys right now, or you'll be cast down into the fiery pit. So you're going to get that response. But anyway, there's a very short scene. It cuts immediately to another. You actually find out that Valentine is spying on him, because Harding comes out of the confessional and Valentine is sitting in the pews. But of course, everything that goes on between a priest and the confession is completely It's completely private. I mean, I'm a lapsed Catholic myself. I know this. The priest never reveals would never reveal what the person tells him in confessional. In fact, there's a very good film with Alec Guinness where he plays a priest who is basically accused of murder. Yet I can't remember the title of the film. It's a good film, but he's basically confessed to by someone who is the murderer in confession, and he won't reveal, even as he himself is sentenced to be hanged. He sticks by his principles and doesn't reveal what was found out. Yeah, you know, they should get priests to just simply to run the UFO project. You know, if they did that, they'd be their secrets would be completely safe. After all, you know, look what they've said about child abuse. Nothing. Yeah. Anyway, Dan then, after back at Area 51, after they find this vitrified patch of sand in the desert, they persuade Dan to show them top secret aircraft. Now, they showed them the Flying Wing, which is like it's a precursor to the B-2 Spirit bomber, which exists today. It's basically, as it explains, it's like an aircraft that consists of a single wing with no visible fuselage. There's no tail, nothing. It's just this wing thing. Now, those were developed all through the 20th century. The Germans were developing them too. They showed them the X-15. Now, this is obviously like very interesting because, again, the X-15 never came along until the 60s. The X-15 is it was built by Northam. It's a space plane. It's very fast. It can fly up to 6 times the speed of sound, and it can fly up to 100,000 feet. It's not a spacecraft. It can't actually achieve escape velocity, but it can get very, very high. It can fly over the edge of space and go into a suborbit spatial journey, rather like Richard Branson's Galaxy is like designed to do. And the X-15 was used to test a lot of the things that went into the space program. But again, you got this in 1953, which is earlier than it was actually built. I think that's interesting. Now, that is possible. You see, it's actually possible. That's accurate. That such craft were developed secretly much earlier than they were available publicly, because we know that the space program, which actually began in 1957 with Sputnik, that there's a massive amount of research went into that beforehand, going right back to the beginning of rocketry. The X-15 is rocket propelled. It's very, very, very fast. It's like a stubby cigar-shaped object. One of its nicknames was the Stogie, which means a cigar. Well, at least that's what it says in the program. And it has just like tailplanes. So then Hynek says, my goodness me, he notices there are lights on the underside of the Flying Wing, and he says, this looks like the Lubbock lights. And this is going back to the previous series, season 1, where they see these Lubbock lights, which some people say were just flying geese. They were geese flying over, and they were in V formation, and the lights from the city was flying over were reflected off these geese, like the geese have mirrors strapped to their chests, you know. It was daft. But then Quinn says, "Oh my goodness, you know that X-15 looks like the thing the guy saw during the dog fight." And I thought, it doesn't really look like that, because the guy in the dogfight scene, in scenes 1, he saw like what he saw was like a green light flying around. But then Quinn says, and Hynek then says, these aircraft could explain some of the sightings that we saw. And in Quinn, in like government mode, says aircraft like these could explain all UFO sightings. And of course that then brings us up to this idea that it's very fashionable idea that UFOs, that's what UFOs are. When people see something they think is extraterrestrial, it's just a very sophisticated man-made aircraft. Well, as you know, I don't go along with that. That certainly is an explanation for some UFO sightings. I mean, one in particular I think could be explained that way would be the Kecksburg incident, where you see what a bell or acorn shaped object came down in the woods. Now, I suspect that that's not extraterrestrial. I do suspect that that is a test by the CIA of a captured Nazi bell, or the beehive, the thing they were developing in the Wenceslas mine. Several reasons for that. It's a long subject. I could be wrong, it could be extraterrestrial, but that's an example of what I'm talking about. It's not this Cosmos Russian satellite. That's a cover story. That's just a Project Mogul story. It means nothing. So you find out actually in the conversation between Harding and Valentine in the church that Eisenhower is now the president. So this dates it This does date it to after January of 1953, when Eisenhower became president. Also, it explains the term UFO, because that was when the Robertson panel sat as well. So that puts it precisely in time, in a period of time we're talking about here. And now, then, Corporal Miller turns up. His body turns up, he's dead, he's hanging in a tree. And they say, well, how did he get there? Did a mountain lion put him up there? Someone says they're going to do an autopsy on him, because we know these big cats do sometimes put their prey up in trees just to keep them away from other big cats and hyenas and things like that. But then it turns out that he has been muted. Now this is pretty significant that they bring this up in the series, because the idea of, obviously, the mutilation phenomenon goes back a long way. Linda Moulton Howe first looked into it in the 70s. She made that film Strange Harvest, where she describes cattle and other animals being mutilated. But then other species turn up, including wild animals, aquatic life, aquatic mammals, things like that. But there was always this sort of like sense, this kind of like almost unspoken assumption that one species was completely exempt. Homo sapiens sapiens. Yes, for some reason the aliens were overlooking us, because we're special, you know? We're special. But, of course, why should we think that? Why should we think... I mean, why should we really put the aliens on that pedestal and think, well, they're going to treat us differently, because we're humans. Come on, guys. It's possible the aliens don't regard us as anything special. They just regard us as a particularly intelligent, upright, walking, hairless ape, and that we are targeted for these abductions, which include the mutilations and deaths, as much as any other species. And indeed, this appears to be what has happened. This appears to be set bodies have turned up like this. If you watch the Rich Planet show, Human Mutilations in NATO, I very much recommend that. I mean, this is what Richard essentially carries on the work that Tony Dodd was doing with his mate. Tony Dodd had this mate who claimed to be this special forces guy who was basically cleaning up human mutilations and aliens and things like that. I mean, it's interesting. Tony reads about it in his book. But watch the DVD, because it's very, very good. Tony Dodd died, and Richard E. Hall managed to get hold of some of his records. That was the thing. So humans turn up like that too, and it's very interesting that this has come up immediately in the 3rd episode of the 2nd season of Project Blue Book. That's going to be controversial on today's UFO scene, because I know Linda Moulton Howe herself is totally against this idea. I mean, Stephen Bassett was as well when I interviewed him. He didn't want to go there. He didn't want to talk about humans turning up like this. So yeah, that's quite daring of the producers of Project Blue Book, actually. And then you get something else interesting happens, because the US Air Force then, they come in, they walk in, and they basically step in and take over from the CIA. So you get this kind of clash within government departments. Dan is basically told that they're taking Miller's body. The guys from Project Blue Book and from the CIA are told to stand aside. Well, Willingham is then arrested by the Air Force. And this ties back to this idea that Agent Cooper, this man that Richard Dolan talked to, who was a CIA agent in the 50s, Dolan basically got a deathbed interview with him when he was living at some old folks' home, and he was on naval specs with oxygen all the time because he couldn't breathe properly. He was dying, basically. I think he must be dead by now. And this guy said that Dwight Eisenhower, when he was president, had this plan to invade Area 51. It's like amazing. I mean, the thing about it is, Eisenhower was president from 53 to 60. Now, you gotta just like... This flies in the face with a lot of what you might think of as common sense. Area 51 is a US government institution. The president is the head of the US government. What are you talking about invading Area 51? But this ties back to the Frost lawsuit as well, because if you know about Area 51, you'll know that a guy called Robert Frost in the 90s tried to sue the government over industrial injuries he had received while serving at Area 51. He and his friends had been part of a civilian contractor team up at Area 51 in developing secret technology, including that involving, well, he didn't necessarily know what it involved, but what they had to do was they had to burn chemicals in a pit. They had like a fire pit there. They had to pour chemicals in and set fire to it. Now, in the course of this, he was poisoned. He and his fellow Area 51 employees were breathing this stuff in. They were poisoned and they became very sick. And they tried to sue. And basically, the line from the government was, well, you know, when you signed up for this job, you were very well paid and you signed away all your rights. You know, you're working at a place that officially doesn't exist. So Yabu sucks to you. Now, one thing the lawyer said was very interesting, because he was interviewed in a documentary, and he said, they asked him, look, are there aliens at Area 51? And the man said, I don't know. But he said it wouldn't surprise me, because that place is a legal black hole. He said there's no congressional oversight of it. It operates off the black budget directly from the Exchequer, from the Treasury. It's the US executive also has no oversight of it. The US President himself can't enter the place without permission. You have to argue if it maybe is not a part of the United States of America at all, and is instead an enclave of some kind of super government. His words, not mine. And this, I think, is the explanation for why Eisenhower may have had this plan. He may have done a plan to put an end to the military-industrial complex, as he calls it. And of course, in his farewell speech in 1960, the last one he gave as president before Kennedy took over, he warned us of the dangers of unplaced power and the military-industrial complex. So it's interesting that Project Blue Book has this plot element of the US Air Force invading Area 51. Anyway, what happens is the response to this by Hynek and Quinn is this I think is the most unrealistic element of the episode. I don't think the abduction or the mutilation was in any way unrealistic. No, that's perfectly plausible. But Hynek and Quinn, they nick a jeep and they decide to do an unauthorised tour of Area 51. Now, and there's these security guards yelling at them, waving with their rifles waving in the air, going, "Stop! Stop! Bring that jeep back!" No. Now, in real life, the moment that happened, they would level their weapons and they would open fire. They'd go for the tyres of the jeep first, but if that didn't work, then they would shoot the driver and the passenger without hesitation. Yeah, that's, you know, stop, come back, bring that jeep back, please. No, this is Area 51, guys. So anyway, Hynek and Quinn then just they dash off in this jeep. And they try to find out what's going on. They go back to the scene of the abduction, and they find guys in hazmat suits, like NBC suits, gas masks, all coverings, gloves, etc., Wellington boots, loading the bodies of coyotes onto the back of a lorry. Coyotes, for those of you who may not know, coyotes are a dog. They're a member of the dog family, they're canines, and they're rather like wolves, and they live in North America in the desert areas, and they're primarily scavengers. They do sometimes take out they form packs and they take out living creatures, but very often they'll pick off dead things. But these coyotes are loaded into the back of the lorry, and they have the mute injuries. Yeah, and then so Hynek and Quinn drive on a bit further, and it gets late at night, and they come across this lorry. They follow this lorry with the dead coyotes, and they say, "Where's it going?" He's just driving up to that cliff face. And this road doesn't lead anywhere. And then they see these hidden double doors on this cliff face open, and inside is a secret underground military base, and it's got a UFO in it, and there's like electric arcs coming off it. You couldn't make it up. And Hynek, he said, "Where's my camera? Where's my camera?" He goes and he gets his camera and going, hurry up, Alan, hurry, get it, move on." And so he's snapping away photos of this thing. But then there's this big bright flash of light, and Hynek, he only loses the bloody camera, doesn't he? He dropped his camera, and Quinn goes, come on, we got to get out of here, we're going to get caught. And Hynek says, I've got to get the camera, and it's only just a few feet away. Oh, forget the camera, just run. And of course, he leaves the camera behind, doesn't he? Anyway, the UFO drives off, and it's interesting because you see a very interesting cinematic device, because they're chased by what they think is a lorry or a car. There's two headlights coming after them, and the headlights seem to catch up with them. But then the headlights suddenly rise into the air and go apart, and you realise they're not headlights, they're actually a UFO. Now, this is a device used very, very effectively by Steven Spielberg in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Because you have like Roy, the main character, Roy Neary, who is played by Richard Dreyfuss. He's an electrician. He's driving around at night trying to fix the electrical problems. You see this like lorry pull up behind him with the headlights in that scene, and then he waves it past. It goes past him over a zebra crossing or something, or a level crossing. Then he drives on a bit further, and you see more headlights come up behind him. But then these headlights suddenly rise into the air, and you realise that it's a flying saucer. And you see the same thing here in Project Blue Book. But anyway, these UFOs are chasing this Jeep, and then big bright light appears overhead, and you suddenly realise Quinn and Hynek are going to get abducted. And you look up, and there's this big mothership, like flying saucer, with a light beaming down on them. And you realise this is what abducted Willingham and Miller. Yeah. Oh. And it's all a bit, there's a lot of suspense, because Mimi goes to write Patterson, and she's in the office, and the secretary comes out and says, Mimi's asking questions, and the secretary's saying, I can't tell you, I'm afraid, that's classified. I think that's just playing for time, but building up the suspense, because in the next scene, you see that Hynek and Quinn are like, they suddenly sort of wake up in this bright light, and there's everything shaking around. You think, oh my god, they're on an alien spacecraft. But then it turns out they're in the back of a lorry, and they've been rescued. But they have 12 hours missing time. Luckily they haven't been muted, and both of them have been returned this time. But they've lost their memory as well. But so they say, I don't remember, what happened? Oh, last thing I remember is we jumped in a Jeep and drove off. But of course we saw what happened, didn't we? In the meantime, the viewer has been told something that these guys have then forgotten. However, funny enough, there's either like there's either a contradiction in the plot, or some of the memory comes back, because Hynek then talks about the secret base they saw, which he doesn't have photos for because he dropped the effing camera. Anyway, what happens then is that Valentine turns up and starts having a go at Quinn and Hynek and saying, what the hell is going on here? And you know, you driving off in a Jeep like this, and you've caused a scandal, the usual thing. And then Dan covers for them and says, it's alright, General, I just asked them to go out and do a few tests and experiments in the desert. So good old Dan, the man, the casual guy, covers for them, the CIA guy. And then that's when Hynek tells him about the underground base. So obviously at least Hynek has got back some of his memory. Or that's an error in the plot. I don't know, a contradiction in the plot. But then, there we go. And then Dan says something interesting. If you guys are ever interested in getting to the truth, just get in touch, give me a call. So we have Dan, it appears the CIA guy, is giving hints that he might become a part of this secret plan that Hynek and Quinn have for disclosure. And maybe he's going to come back into the series. We'll have to see. Anyway, then Susie comes back into it. Now Susie, of course, is this KGB honey trap who is currently ensnaring Quinn, and then previously she was leeching onto Mimi. Now she's moved on to Quinn, but of course Quinn doesn't know who she is. All he knows is she's this what Del Boy Trotter calls a blinding bird, Rodney, a blinding bird, and he's of course hypnotised by her, which is the idea. Anyway, she's at this like drive-in cinema, and they're watching this western. Interestingly, earlier in the series, earlier in the program, you have Heineck and Mimi watching It Came From Outer Space, which is like a cheap 50s sci-fi show. It's not bad film actually. They're watching now a Western, so they're going back to an earlier period of American sort of popular entertainment. And then this other woman gets in the car next to her, and you realise it's her KGB handler. And Susie then says something. She says, this Project Blue Book, it's simply the whole UFO thing. It's nothing to do with aliens. It's all about secret aircraft. Now, it's interesting she says that, because surely she knows better. If she's engaged in pillow talk with Quinn, and she's getting all the information she needs out of him, she would know differently. So is she lying to her KGB handler, or is Quinn lying to her? The answers hopefully will come later in the series. The final scene is basically Quinn and Valentine, Generals Harding and Valentine. They just got off the plane from Nevada, where Area 51 is, and they're just talking about damn CIA guys, they're going to make us obsolete. And so there's this like inter-service rivalry thing, because of course a lot of projects during the Cold War during that period were shared between the US Air Force and CIA. For example, spy planes, things like that. The U-2 was run by the CIA directly, others were run through other areas. And like the US Air Force, I think, ran the Blackbird, the SR-71 Blackbird, things like that. So this is a kind of inter-service rivalry. And of course you saw that, didn't you, with the US Air Force attempt invading Area 51, arresting Willingham and taking Miller's body. So there's this clash, there's this little civil war going on within the US infrastructure. And then I think it was it Valentine who says, I'm fed up of us pretending to go for war, let's fire the first shot. And he holds up this paper, and the viewer, and then the camera zooms in on it, and it says plan for alien, it says what to say, yeah, plan for UFO invasion. And that's then the program ends. What does it mean by plan for UFO invasion? A plan for a fake alien invasion? Or are real aliens going to invade, and the Air Force knows about it and has a plan for it? And then Valentine says, let's fire the first shot and get this war done. Or some words to that effect. Is he saying let's start the fake alien invasion, or let's carry out a preemptive strike against the aliens, to perhaps as a kind of Copenhagen maneuver to get them into war with us? All hopefully will be revealed in future episodes. And of course, when they're revealed in future episodes, they will be revealed also in my HPANWO TV review of Project Blue Book Season 2. So thank you very much all of you for watching HPANWO TV yet again. There's another video coming soon, seeing as I'm self-isolating and I'm feeling better. I've got a lot of free time until I go back to work in 4 days. So to prevent myself getting bored, I'll probably make a lot of more videos. So thanks for watching HPANWO TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order.